For thousands of years, people were told that some of the most famous stories in the Bible were only myths. Noah and the flood, Moses and the plagues of Egypt, the waters opening before a desperate people, King David, once dismissed by some as only a legend, and Pontius Pilate, the Roman official who stood at the center of the crucifixion of Jesus. But then something began to happen beneath the soil of the Middle East. Archaeologists started finding layers of destruction. Ancient inscriptions began to speak. Forgotten stones started naming people the Bible had described centuries ago. And suddenly, stories that many had placed in the world of myth were standing face to face with evidence. This is not just a story about archaeology, it is a story about memory. It is about the thin line between faith and history. It is about people who believed, people who doubted, and discoveries that forced even serious scholars to look again. Because what if some of the stories people laughed at were not invented out of nothing? What if they were memories of real events, carried through generations, shaped by faith, preserved in scripture, and buried under the dust of time? Before we go deeper, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Saints and Miracles, and share this episode with someone who loves biblical mysteries, ancient history, archaeology, faith, and extraordinary true stories. This channel exists to bring these stories back to life with respect, research, and wonder. And after this video, explore the other documentaries here on Saints and Miracles, because every episode opens another door into the mysteries of faith and history. For many believers, the Bible has always been more than an ancient book. It is a sacred text. It carries hope, warning, suffering, redemption, and the story of God working through human history. But for many skeptics, the Bible has long been viewed in a very different way. They see it as a collection of moral tales, old legends, and religious memories written by people trying to explain the world around them. And to be fair, some biblical stories are difficult to imagine. A flood that changes the world, 10 plagues falling on Egypt, a sea opening in front of a fleeing nation, a shepherd boy becoming the king of Israel, a Roman governor washing his hands before sending Jesus to the cross. These stories are powerful, but they also sound extraordinary. And extraordinary stories invite extraordinary questions. Did these things really happen? Were they remembered exactly as they occurred? Were they shaped by generations of telling and retelling? Or are they something else entirely? Stories with deep spiritual meaning, but no connection to physical history. Here is where things get interesting, because over the last century, archaeology has not answered every question. It has not solved every mystery. It has not proved every miracle in a simple way. But it has done something just as fascinating. It has shown that the world behind the Bible was real. The cities were real. The empires were real. The kings, customs, wars, languages, and political powers were often exactly where the Bible said they would be. And sometimes, buried under stone, mud, and sand, archaeologists found things that seemed to whisper, "Look again." The first story takes us back to one of the oldest and most famous accounts in Scripture, Noah and the flood. It is a story known across the world, a righteous man, a corrupt world, a warning from God, a massive ark built before the waters came, animals gathered, a family saved, a world washed clean. Even people who have never studied the Bible often know the image. Noah, the ark, the rain, the dove, and the rainbow. For believers, it is a story of judgment, mercy, obedience, and a new beginning. But for skeptics, it has often been one of the easiest stories to dismiss. A global flood, a wooden vessel large enough to preserve life, animals surviving inside it. To modern ears, the story sounds almost impossible. But wait, there is more. The flood story is not found only in the Bible. In the ancient world, especially in Mesopotamia, there were flood stories that looked strangely familiar. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, is one of the birthplaces of civilization. It is the world of early cities, early writing, kings, temples, and some of humanity's oldest surviving literature. Among those ancient writings is the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature. In that story, a man named Utnapishtim is warned about a great flood. He builds a large boat. He brings his family and animals. The waters come. The world is changed. Later, birds are sent out to see if the land has returned. When scholars compared this with the biblical story of Noah, the similarity was hard to ignore. Now, some people saw this as a reason to doubt the Bible. They said the Bible must have borrowed from older stories. Others saw it differently. They wondered if these different accounts might be distant memories of a real catastrophe, remembered in different languages by different peoples across many generations. And this is where the ground itself enters the story. In the early 20th century, archaeologists working in ancient Mesopotamian sites found something striking: thick layers of flood sediment. In places connected to ancient cities, layers of mud separated earlier settlements from later ones. It looked as if a powerful flood had interrupted life so suddenly that entire communities had been buried under water and silt. Now, this does not prove that every part of the Noah story happened exactly as many imagine. Archaeologists are careful. A flood layer in one region does not automatically mean a global flood covered every mountain on Earth. But it does show that ancient Mesopotamia experienced devastating floods, the kind of disaster that could erase a world as local people knew it. Think about that for a moment. If you lived in a river valley thousands of years ago, and every town you knew was underwater, every field gone, every road swallowed, every home destroyed, you would not say, "Our valley flooded." You might say, "The whole world was flooded," because for you, that was the world. And then there is the ark itself. For centuries, people argued that the ark described in Genesis was too large, too strange, too unrealistic. But in 2014, physics students at the University of Leicester in England looked at the biblical dimensions of the ark and asked a simple question: would something like this float? They were not trying to prove every detail of the story. They were not solving the question of animals, food, or logistics. They were asking a narrower question. According to basic physics, could a vessel with those dimensions stay afloat? The answer surprised many people. Using the biblical measurements converted into modern units, the ark came out as a massive wooden vessel, long and wide enough to displace a huge amount of water. Based on the basic laws of buoyancy, they concluded that the ark, as described, would be physically capable of floating with a large load. Here is where things get interesting. That does not prove Noah's voyage in every detail, but it does remove one common objection. The structure described in Genesis was not physically absurd. It did not violate the basic laws of nature. The ancient description, at least in terms of shape and scale, could work on water. And that raises a deeper question: why does this matter? Because archaeology and science often do not confirm biblical stories all at once. They work like pieces of a broken mosaic. A text here, a flood layer there, a measurement that fits, a name carved into stone, a city found where it was supposed to be. One piece may not prove everything, but piece after piece begins to change the conversation. The story now moves from water to Egypt, from Noah to Moses. Moses stands at the center of one of the most dramatic stories in the Bible: a child hidden from death, a Hebrew raised in Pharaoh's house, a man who flees into the wilderness, a voice from a burning bush, a mission to confront the most powerful ruler in the region. Let my people go. For generations, readers have been captivated by the 10 plagues of Egypt. Water turned to blood, frogs, insects, disease, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally, the death of the firstborn. To believers, these were signs of divine power. To skeptics, they were legendary disasters written long after the fact. But in modern times, scientists and scholars began to ask a different question. Could some of these plagues reflect real natural events remembered through the lens of faith? One of the most discussed ideas is that the plagues may have followed an environmental chain reaction. Imagine the Nile River, the lifeline of Egypt, suddenly changing color. A toxic algal bloom, red sediment, or another natural event could make the water appear blood-like. If the oxygen in the river dropped, fish could die. The smell would spread. The river would become dangerous. Then frogs, forced out of the water, would move onto land. If they died in large numbers, insects could multiply. Insects could spread disease. Livestock could become sick. People could develop sores. A storm of hail could destroy crops. Locusts could finish what remained. A severe dust storm or volcanic ash in the atmosphere could darken the sky. At first glance, this sounds like a modern attempt to explain away the Bible. But the more you think about it, the stranger it becomes. Because the biblical story presents the plagues not as random events, but as a sequence. One disaster follows another. The world of Egypt becomes unstable, and each stage seems to make the next one worse. What happened next changed everything. The idea that the plagues might have natural components does not necessarily weaken the story. For many believers, it may deepen it. Because if God is creator, then nature itself can become the stage on which judgment and deliverance unfold. A miracle does not always have to be nature being destroyed. Sometimes it may be nature arriving at the exact moment, in the exact order, with the exact meaning. But then comes the hardest part of the Exodus story: the sea. The image is unforgettable. Moses stands before the water. Behind him, the Egyptian army is closing in. In front of him, there is no road. The people are trapped. Panic spreads. Then the waters move. A path appears. The people cross on dry ground. The army follows, and the waters return. For many skeptics, this was impossible. Seas do not simply open. Water does not stand aside for a crowd of refugees. The story was placed in the category of myth. But then scientists began studying a phenomenon known as wind set-down. Wind set-down happens when strong, steady wind blows over shallow water and pushes it away from one area, exposing land that is normally underwater. It is not fantasy. It is a known physical process. It has been observed in different places, usually on a smaller scale. A study by researcher Carl Drews and others used computer modeling to explore whether strong winds could have created a temporary land bridge in a shallow region near the eastern Nile Delta. The idea was not that the deep Red Sea split like a wall in a movie. The model focused on a shallow lake or lagoon system, where a powerful wind blowing for many hours could push water back and expose a crossing. Imagine the terror of that moment. A people fleeing in the night, wind screaming across the water, muddy ground appearing where water had been, families moving quickly, children crying, animals stumbling, elders being helped forward, behind them soldiers approaching. And then, when the wind stops, the water comes rushing back. This next part surprised even historians. The study did not claim to prove the Exodus. It treated the biblical account as an ancient story and tested whether a natural mechanism could create something like what it described. And the answer was yes. Under certain conditions, a strong wind over shallow water could open a temporary path and then close it again. Again, this does not settle every question. Where exactly did the crossing happen? How many people were involved? How should we understand the numbers in the text? Scholars still debate these issues. But the old claim that this could never happen in nature is not as strong as it once seemed. And this is the pattern we keep seeing. The Bible tells a dramatic story. Skeptics dismiss it. Then archaeology, geology, physics, or ancient inscriptions reveal that the world behind the story is more serious than people thought. Now we move from Moses to kings. For centuries, King David was one of the most important figures in the Bible. The shepherd boy who faced Goliath, the musician who played for Saul, the warrior, the poet, the flawed man, the king who made Jerusalem his capital, the ancestor remembered in the line of the Messiah. But in modern scholarship, some questioned whether David was a real historical figure. They argued that the biblical stories were written much later. They saw David as a national legend, perhaps like a heroic founder invented to give Israel a glorious past. Without evidence outside the Bible, they said David might not have existed as described. Then came a discovery that changed the debate. In 1993, at Tel Dan in northern Israel, archaeologists found fragments of a stone inscription. It was written in Aramaic and dated to the 9th century before Christ, not long after the period traditionally associated with David's dynasty. The inscription appears to refer to the House of David. Those words mattered a lot, because if a foreign king, in an inscription outside the Bible, referred to the House of David, then David was not merely a literary invention created many centuries later. At the very least, by the 9th century before Christ, there was a recognized royal dynasty connected to a figure named David. Here is where things get interesting. The Tel Dan Stele did not tell the story of David and Goliath. It did not prove every story about David's life. It did not solve every question about the size of his kingdom. But it did something very important. It pushed David out of the realm of pure myth and into historical memory. It showed that the name David mattered in the ancient world outside the pages of Scripture. And that was not the only discovery connected to ancient Jerusalem. The city of David, the narrow ridge south of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, has been one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. For years, excavations have uncovered ancient walls, tunnels, water systems, and fortifications. One key feature is the Gihon Spring, the natural water source that helped make Jerusalem possible as a city. In the ancient world, water meant survival. If an enemy surrounded a city, a protected water source could be the difference between life and death. Archaeologists have uncovered massive fortifications connected to the spring, including what has been called the Spring Citadel. Some have connected these finds to the kind of stronghold described in the biblical account of David's capture of Jerusalem. However, nobody expected what would happen next. The more archaeologists dug, the more they found a city with deep roots, complex defenses, and strategic planning. Even when scholars disagree about exact dates or interpretations, the discoveries show that ancient Jerusalem was not an empty legend. It was a real place, built, defended, repaired, attacked, and remembered. Then there is Solomon. The Bible describes Solomon as David's son, a king known for wisdom, wealth, building projects, and international connections. It says he built fortifications and major structures. As with David, scholars have debated how much of the biblical description reflects history and how much reflects later memory. Archaeological discoveries in Jerusalem and other sites continue to be discussed. Some structures have been proposed as possible evidence of a more organized kingdom during the period traditionally linked to David and Solomon. Other scholars urge caution. They warn that dating ancient stonework can be difficult and that political or religious hopes can sometimes influence interpretation. That caution matters. A good documentary should not pretend every claim is settled. Faith does not need careless exaggeration. Truth is strong enough to be treated honestly. But the larger point remains. The old idea that the biblical world was mostly fictional has become harder to defend. Again and again, archaeology has shown that the Bible's setting is deeply rooted in real geography, real politics, real cities, real kings, and real conflicts. But wait, there is more, because the most dramatic discoveries are not always about kings. Sometimes they are about a single name, a name carved into stone. And that brings us to Pontius Pilate. For Christians, Pilate is one of the most famous officials in history. He appears in the trial of Jesus. He questions him. He faces pressure from the crowd. He washes his hands. He orders the crucifixion. For centuries, believers knew Pilate from the Gospels. Ancient historians like Josephus and Tacitus also mentioned him. But in archaeology, there was a long silence. There was no inscription, no stone, no direct physical evidence from Judea with his name. Some skeptics used that silence to raise doubts. Was Pilate remembered accurately? Was his role exaggerated? Was he a convenient figure in a religious story? Then, in 1961, archaeologists working at Caesarea Maritima found something extraordinary. Caesarea was the Roman administrative center of Judea. It was a grand coastal city built by Herod the Great, with a harbor, theater, and Roman architecture. During excavations at the ancient theater, a limestone block was discovered. It had been reused in a later structure, almost like a discarded piece of the past. But on that stone, carved in Latin, was a name: Pontius Pilate. The inscription identified him with Judea and his official role. Here was physical, archaeological evidence for the man known from the Gospels as the Roman authority involved in the crucifixion of Jesus. And this is where the story becomes truly remarkable. The Pilate Stone did not prove the crucifixion by itself. It did not describe the trial of Jesus. It did not say, "This man judged Christ." But it confirmed that Pontius Pilate was not a fictional character. He was real. He held authority in Judea during the exact period connected to the Gospel accounts. He belonged to the world the New Testament describes. For many viewers, this may sound simple. Of course, Pilate existed. Christians have said this for centuries, but in historical investigation, names matter. Inscriptions matter. Stone matters. A name carved into limestone can silence generations of speculation, and Pilate's name was not alone. Archaeology has also brought other New Testament settings into sharper focus. The Pool of Siloam in Jerusalem, mentioned in the Gospel of John in the story of Jesus healing a man born blind, was rediscovered and excavated in modern times. The Sea of Galilee boat, sometimes called the Jesus boat, discovered in the 1980s, is a first-century fishing vessel from the kind of world Jesus and his disciples knew. In Jerusalem, ossuaries, inscriptions, roads, ritual baths, and coins continue to build a picture of daily life in the time of Jesus. Again, these discoveries do not prove every miracle in a laboratory sense. Archaeology cannot place faith under a microscope. It cannot measure grace. It cannot weigh forgiveness. It cannot photograph the resurrection. But it can show that the stories were not floating in empty space. They were set in a real world, with real rulers, real roads, real pools, real boats, real cities, and real human beings. And sometimes that is more powerful than people expect. Think about the emotional weight of this. For nearly 2,000 years, Christians spoke the words of the Creed, suffered under Pontius Pilate. That line places Jesus in history, not in a dream, not in a mythic age, not once upon a time. It places him under a known Roman official, in a known province, under a known empire. Then, after centuries, a stone comes out of the ground and bears the name of that same official. That is the kind of discovery that makes even skeptics pause. Now, let us return to the title of this episode. They said these Bible stories were myths. Then archaeologists found proof. The word proof must be handled carefully. In popular speech, proof means something powerful, something that makes denial difficult. In scholarship, proof is often more cautious. Archaeology rarely proves every detail of an ancient story. Instead, it confirms context. It supports names. It reveals cities. It shows that events similar to the stories could have happened. It uncovers the world in which those stories were born. So what exactly has been proven? Not every miracle, not every detail, not every number, not every tradition, but something very important has been proven. The Bible cannot honestly be dismissed as just myth in a simple or lazy way. The world of the Bible was real. Mesopotamia really had ancient flood traditions and devastating flood layers. The ark's basic dimensions are not physically ridiculous. Natural mechanisms may help explain how some events in Exodus could have unfolded in the physical world. The name House of David appears in an ancient inscription outside the Bible. Jerusalem's ancient water systems and fortifications show a city of real strategic importance. Pontius Pilate's name is carved in stone. One discovery alone might be debated. Two might be dismissed, but taken together they form a pattern. And the pattern says this: ancient scripture preserved more historical memory than many people expected. That does not remove faith. It does not reduce the Bible to archaeology. It does not say every holy mystery can be explained by soil, stone, and science. But it does remind us that faith and history are not enemies. They often meet in the dust. There is something deeply moving about that. A person opens the Bible and reads of Noah. Then archaeologists dig in Mesopotamia and find memories of ancient floods. A person reads of Moses and the waters. Then scientists discover that wind can move shallow water in ways that once seemed impossible. A person reads of David. Then a broken stone from the 9th century before Christ speaks of his house. A person reads of Pilate. Then a Latin inscription emerges from Caesarea with his name. Here is where things get interesting. The discoveries do not make faith unnecessary. They make the story more human, more grounded, more alive. They remind us that the Bible is not only a book of ideas. It is filled with places where people walked, cried, feared, built, sinned, prayed, and hoped. Noah in the biblical story obeys when the world laughs. Moses stands before an empire when he feels weak. David is overlooked before he is chosen. Pilate has power, but not courage. These are not only ancient names, they are mirrors. And perhaps that is why these discoveries matter so much. Because when ancient stones confirm a name, or when the soil shows a disaster, we are not just learning about the past. We are being reminded that human choices echo through time. A flood story is not only about water, it is about corruption, warning, obedience, and mercy. The plagues are not only about disaster, they are about pride, oppression, and the cost of refusing justice. The crossing is not only about water moving. It is about a trapped people discovering that the impossible path may open at the moment they need it most. David's name on stone is not only about a king. It is about the way God can raise the unlikely and make a forgotten shepherd part of a story that outlives empires. Pilate's inscription is not only about a Roman official. It is about the terrible moment when worldly power stands before innocence and chooses convenience over truth. And this is where the story becomes truly remarkable. The greatest revelation is not just that archaeologists found objects connected to the Bible. The greatest revelation is that the Bible has survived every attempt to bury it. Empires tried to control its world. Time tried to erase its cities. Skeptics tried to reduce its stories to myth. Sand covered its stones. Languages died. Kingdoms fell. Temples were destroyed. Libraries burned. But then, piece by piece, the ground began giving things back. A flood layer, a broken inscription, a city wall, a spring fortress, a stone with Pilate's name. The past did not stay silent, and for many people, that is where wonder begins. Near the end of this journey, it is important to say something clearly. Archaeology should not be used carelessly. Not every headline is true. Not every claimed discovery is accepted by scholars. Not every stone proves what someone wants it to prove. There are debates, doubts, corrections, and disagreements. That is part of honest history. But honest history also requires humility from skeptics. It is no longer enough to say, "The Bible is myth," and walk away. The evidence is more complex than that. The world beneath the Bible is too real, too detailed, and too stubborn to ignore. And maybe that is the lesson. Faith is not afraid of questions. Faith has survived questions for thousands of years. It has survived empires, persecutions, scandals, wars, doubts, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations. If faith is true, then truth will not destroy it. Truth will refine it. The archaeologist with a brush in his hand, the physicist modeling wind and water, the historian reading broken letters on stone, and the believer reading scripture by lamplight are all, in different ways, searching for what is real. And sometimes their paths cross. Before we close, please subscribe to Saints and Miracles, like this video, and share it with someone who would be moved by this story. Producing these documentaries takes time, research, dedication, and historical investigation. Your support helps keep this channel alive, and it may also contribute to humanitarian and charitable initiatives inspired by the mission of the Church. Every donation, every share, every comment, and every new subscriber helps us continue telling stories of faith, courage, sacrifice, suffering, hope, redemption, and historical impact. So were these Bible stories myths? Some details will continue to be debated. Some mysteries may never be fully solved. Some miracles remain beyond the reach of archaeology. Because a miracle is not only an event in the world, it is also a sign, a message, a meeting point between heaven and earth. But the old certainty that these stories were simply invented has been shaken. The ground has spoken, the stones have remembered, and the stories that many thought were buried forever have risen again from the dust, not as simple answers, but as invitations. Invitations to look closer, to question honestly, to believe more deeply, to understand that history is not dead. It is waiting, waiting under the sand, waiting in forgotten ruins, waiting in broken inscriptions, waiting for the moment when someone uncovers a stone, reads a name, and realizes that the ancient story was not as far away as we thought. And maybe that is why the Bible continues to endure, not because every mystery has been solved, but because its stories still have the power to disturb the skeptic, strengthen the believer, and call every generation back to the question that matters most. What if these ancient stories were not trying to escape history? What if they were carrying history all along?